The alien widow knocked and said, "Warm me, human. My children need you." The wind howled outside like a wild beast. Snow slapped against the cabin walls. Inside, a man named Reed sat alone by the fire, his fingers wrapped around a warm mug. The fire cracked, but his heart stayed cold. He had lived on this frozen planet for almost 3 years. No visitors, no neighbors, no friends, just silence and snow. He liked it that way until that night. Bang, bang, 3 knocks at the door. Hard, loud, and sudden. Reed froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. Nobody ever came here. He reached for the old plasma rifle hanging on the wall. Slowly, he moved to the door. Another knock came. Softer this time, almost desperate. He opened it. A rush of cold air burst in, and, with it a figure. An alien woman stood there. Her skin was pale gray, her eyes a glowing amber. Snow clung to her long, dark cloak. Behind her stood 2 small children. Shaking, thin, and silent, they looked half-starved, their tiny hands gripping each other tightly. The woman took 1 step forward. Her voice was soft but clear. "Warm me, human. My children need you." Then she collapsed. Reed's instincts kicked in. He lowered the rifle, bent down, and pulled her inside. He hesitated, then grabbed the children too. They were light to light for their age. Once the door was shut, the wind howled louder outside, but inside, it was quiet again. He placed the woman on the old couch near the fire. Her face was pale, her lips blue. The children stood near the heat, unsure, eyes wide. Reed threw 2 extra logs into the fire. The warmth spread slowly, like life returning to the air. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The woman didn't answer. She was breathing, barely. He checked her arms, bruised, scratched, but not broken. On her wrist was a mark burned into the skin, a symbol he didn't recognize. He wrapped her in a blanket and turned to the kids. They flinched, stepping back. He knelt down slowly, showing his empty hands. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said softly. "One of them." The smaller girl nodded slowly. The boy just stared, silent as stone. Hours passed. The fire warmed the cabin, and the snow kept falling outside. Reed made a thin soup with what little food he had. The kids ate it fast, like animals who hadn't eaten in days. He gave them water, then let them sleep on a mat near the fire. The woman finally stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked at Reed, confused, weak. "You're safe here," he said. Her lips moved, whispering something he didn't hear. He leaned closer. "They'll come," she whispered. "They'll find us." "Who?" he asked. She didn't answer, just shook her head and looked at her children. Reed saw fear in her eyes. Not just fear, but something deeper. Hopelessness. "What happened to you?" he asked. She whispered again. "I ran. They wanted the girls." Then she closed her eyes and passed out again. Reed sat back, confused and tense. Who was she? Why did she have human words? Why did she knock on his door out of every cabin in the frozen valley? He checked the scanner near the window. No signals, no ships, no signs of life, but he knew better. If she was telling the truth, someone or something was coming. He looked back at her and the children. Something wasn't right. He wasn't a hero, not anymore. He had lost too much in the war. He had buried his wife and child on a different world. Since then, he only survived, never lived. But tonight, something stirred in him. Maybe it was the fire. Maybe it was the way the little girl clutched his shirt when she slept. Maybe it was the quiet plea from a woman too weak to run. Whatever it was, it made him stay awake, watching the door. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere in the dark, something was watching. Reed stayed awake all night, sitting near the fire with the plasma rifle across his lap. The flames made soft cracking sounds, but his eyes were fixed on the door. He didn't trust the quiet outside, not anymore. Something deep in his gut told him this was only the beginning. The alien woman still hadn't woken. Her skin looked dry and dull, like someone who hadn't eaten or slept in days. Her arms clutched tightly around her body. even in sleep, as if she expected pain. Reed didn't know her name, or what species she was exactly, but he knew enough. She was broken, and yet she had walked through a storm with 2 small children to knock on his door. At first light, one of the kids woke up. The boy sat up and looked around with sharp, scared eyes. Reed poured a little warm broth into a cup and held it out. The boy didn't move. Then, slowly, the girl woke too, rubbing her tiny fists into her eyes. She looked at Reed, then at the cup, and took a small step forward. She touched it with her thin fingers and pulled it toward her lips. "She's brave," Reed muttered. The boy finally came closer. Never breaking eye contact with the human, Reed handed him the rest of the soup and nodded. No words were needed. They ate, quietly. Their breathing slowed. Their shoulders dropped just a little. After some time, the woman stirred again. She opened her eyes and tried to sit up, but her body trembled. Reed helped her gently, placing a pillow behind her back. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice rough and dry. "You're in my cabin, safe for now," Reed said. She looked around, saw the fire, saw her children, and closed her eyes with relief. Reed sat across from her and asked the question burning in his mind. "Why did you come here? Why me?" She took a long breath and said, "Because I was told humans are warm, even when everything else is cold." Reed blinked, unsure if she meant physically or something else. "I had no place else to go," she added. "The others turned us away. Or worse." Reed leaned forward. "Who's chasing you?" She looked at her children, then whispered, "The collectors." Reed frowned. He'd heard that name before. During the war, a group of traffickers, slavers known for taking the weak, especially females and hybrids. They paid bounties for widows and children of certain bloodlines. Sometimes they sold them, sometimes they used them, and now they were after her. "You are marked," he said, remembering the burn on her wrist. "Yes," she whispered, "branded. When my mate died, they claimed me and the girls as property. I escaped," she added, "but not for long." Reed stood up and checked his scanner again. Still nothing. But scanners weren't perfect. If the collectors were nearby, they'd use shielded ships and quiet tech. He turned back to her. "What's your name?" "Kyrene," she said slowly. "And them?" "Arla." She pointed to the little girl. "And Solon, the boy." Reed nodded, then finally spoke his name too. "Reed." Kyrene tried to stand, but her knees gave out. Reed caught her before she fell. His arms around her felt the bones beneath her skin. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "You're weak, starving, and cold, but they'll come," she whispered again. "They always do." He looked at the children, now curled up together by the fire. They had stopped shaking, but their eyes still showed fear. He'd seen that look before, on his daughter's face. Right before she died, a flash of memory hit him hard. The burning colony, the screams, the rubble his family buried under it, and now, 2 more kids were in front of him, with no one left but her. Reed made a choice. He would help them, even if it meant facing death again, because no one deserved to be hunted like this, especially not children. He walked to the back room and pulled out his old supply case. Inside were emergency packs, weapons, and an old signal jammer. If someone was tracking them, this would give him time to prepare. He hooked it up and activated it. A pulse spread across the cabin, silent and invisible. Kyrene looked up at him with tired eyes. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Reed glanced at her, then at the children. "Yes, I do," he said. "You came to the right door." Outside, snow still fell, but now, the hunter had become the protector. And someone, somewhere, had just lost their prey. The next night came faster than Reed expected. The snow outside had turned thicker, like a white curtain blocking the world. But even with the cabin buried under silence, Reed couldn't rest. His eyes kept going back to the burn mark on Kyrene's wrist. That symbol wasn't just some scar. It was a brand, a warning, and maybe a signal. He waited until the kids were asleep, curled up together near the fire. Kyrene sat on the edge of the couch, her face lit by the orange glow. He pulled a small scanner from his old military case and held her wrist gently. "I need to see if it's active," he said. She nodded once, not moving. The scanner hummed, a soft blue light blinking, then a faint ping. Reed's jaw tightened. "It's still transmitting," he muttered. Her breath caught. "They're coming." "Not yet," he said. "I've got a jammer running. It's blocking the signal from leaving this area for now." Kyrene pulled her wrist back, her hands shaking. "They use those marks to track property," she said bitterly. "Not people. Property." She wasn't crying, but the anger in her voice was sharper than tears. Reed looked at her face, then at the children. "They aren't full alien, are they?" he asked quietly. Kyrene looked away, then back. "No," she whispered. "Their father was human." That made Reed go still. It explained a lot: their skin tone, their smaller eyes, their hair, and why the collectors were after them. Hybrid children were rare and worth more than pure bloods in some black markets. They weren't just running from death, they were running from being owned, used, bred. Reed stood and walked to the window. The snow covered everything, but in the distance, barely visible, was a flicker of light. A red flash, then gone. He narrowed his eyes. That wasn't natural. It was a pulse beacon, someone pinging the area, looking for a response, a scout. Maybe, or worse. He turned back to Kyrene. "We need to move soon, but where will we go?" she asked, voice tired and rough. "There's an old mining facility west of here," Reed said. "Deep underground, off-grid, abandoned after the collapse." "Can we make it with the children?" she asked. "We'll have to," he said. "If they find this cabin, it's over." Kyrene didn't argue. She just nodded. She was strong in ways Reed couldn't understand. She had crossed frozen lands with nothing but hope, and now she trusted a man she barely knew to lead her further into danger. Maybe that was strength, or maybe it was desperation. Reed packed quickly. Ration bars, blankets, 2 small heaters, old but working. He wrapped the children in heavy cloaks and secured them to a sled once used for cargo, now carrying life. Kyrene helped silently, always watching the door when they were ready. Reed stood near the threshold and took one last look at the place he'd called home. Then he poured fuel over the walls, struck a spark. Flames began to eat the wood as snow fell harder. A false signal, a trick he wanted them to believe they had died in the fire. They moved under the cover of darkness. The sled slid over the frozen ground as Reed pulled it with slow but steady steps. Kyrene walked beside him, quiet, shivering, but not weak. The night around them was filled with shadows, and somewhere behind those shadows, the hunters were coming. The light from the cabin fire glowed far behind them now. Then, after a while, it vanished. Only snow and silence remained. After hours of walking, they reached the ridge above the valley. Reed pulled out a small pair of night binoculars and looked back there. Near the burning ruins of his cabin, 2 dark shapes moved, humanoid, armored, not local, collectors. Too late to catch them, but close enough to chase. He felt Kyrene step beside him, her breath fogging in the cold. "They'll track us," she said. "I know," Reed whispered. "That's why we don't stop." As they moved again, one of the children stirred in the sled. The little girl, Arla, opened her eyes and looked at Reed. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it reached his ears in the stillness. "Will you keep us warm forever?" she asked. Reed stopped walking. Just for a second, he looked at her, those small, trusting eyes, half alien, half human. He gave a slow nod. "I'll try," he said. "For as long as I can." Behind them, the darkness kept moving, but so did hope. They traveled in silence. Snowflakes drifted down like falling ash, covering the land in cold silence. Reed's breath fogged the air in slow puffs. His hands gripped the sled rope tighter as the slope got steeper. The path ahead was full of jagged rocks, broken metal, and frozen memories. They had left behind the burning cabin hours ago, but the warmth it gave had already faded from their bones. Kyrene moved beside him like a shadow. She said nothing, but her eyes scanned the horizon, alert. Her steps were slower now. She was hurting, but she didn't stop. The children were bundled deep in blankets, too tired to speak. Only Arla peeked out now and then, eyes wide with wonder and fear. Solon kept his arms around her, as if protecting her from the world. Reed glanced back at them often. Each time, he walked faster. He had to get them to shelter before the next storm hit. They reached the canyon by nightfall. Reed stopped and looked down. Far below, hidden in the rock, was a collapsed mining station from the old Terran days. The entrance was half buried, but he remembered the back way in. He had been there once, when he was young and stupid, and still believed in orders. "This is it," he said. Kyrene didn't respond, just nodded and followed him down the slope. The sled scraped against the stone as they descended. A few times, Reed slipped, his knees crashing against the ice. Blood soaked into the fabric of his pants, but he kept going. At the bottom, they reached a sealed hatch built into the canyon wall. It looked like a tomb, cold metal, dead. Reed knelt and pulled open the panel beside it. He wiped away ice and dirt until the old keypad lit up, flickering. He typed in a code he hadn't used in years. The lock clicked, the door creaked. A blast of stale air rushed out. It smelled like rust, oil, and dust, but it was dry, and it was shelter. Reed pulled the sled inside first. Kyrene followed with her hand resting gently on Arla's shoulder. Once inside, he shut the door and locked it. Darkness surrounded them, thick and heavy. Reed reached for a control panel on the wall and slammed his fist against it. The backup lights flickered on, buzzing softly. The hallway was narrow, lined with old cables and storage crates. They walked deeper until they found a room big enough to rest, a broken command station, wires dangling from the ceiling like dead vines, but the walls were solid, and the door still sealed shut. They laid the children on an old table and covered them with blankets. Reed found a battery-powered heater in one of the crates and placed it near them. It hummed to life, soft and steady. Heat returned, little by little. Kyrene sat down slowly, her body finally giving in. Reed crouched beside her and offered water. She drank, then looked at him with tired eyes. "You didn't have to come this far," she said. "I did," he replied, "because they would have taken you. And if they find us," she asked, "then I make sure they regret it." Her lips trembled, but not from the cold. She was holding something in. Then, finally, she whispered, "My husband died in front of me, protecting us." Reed didn't speak. He just listened. "He told me to run, that someone would help, that someone human would care." She looked up at him. He believed that even at the end. Reed looked down, his jaw clenched. "I used to be someone worth helping," he said. "Now, I just survive." Kyrene reached out and placed her hand over his. "You're still worth it," she whispered behind them. Arla made a soft sound in her sleep. Solon stirred, but didn't wake. Their small bodies, wrapped in old blankets, looked peaceful for now. Reed stood and looked around the room. Old systems, half dead, flickering screens. But maybe, just maybe, he could bring some of it back. He needed cameras, traps, anything, to slow the collectors down, because this was the last stop. If they found them here, there would be no more running. He took a deep breath, pulled off his coat, and rolled up his sleeves. Behind him, Kyrene whispered something he almost missed. "Will you protect them like your own?" Reed paused, his hands resting on the broken terminal. Then he looked back at her. "Yes," he said, "and I won't let them take anything else from me." Outside, the wind screamed across the canyon. But underground, a new kind of warmth began to grow. Not just fire or heat, but the kind that came from a promise, one made in the dark, and meant to be kept. The mining station groaned in the dark. Old pipes hissed. Walls creaked with age, and every sound echoed like a warning. But for now, it held them, a forgotten place, buried beneath stone and snow, where hunters above couldn't see them yet. Reed worked through the night, He repaired old wires, pulled apart rusted panels, and linked a dead system to a portable battery. One by one, the lights flickered back to life, only dimly, but enough. He connected motion sensors to the outer tunnels and reactivated the door locks. Not perfect, but it would give them time if someone came. Kyrene watched him work, sitting quietly in the corner. She didn't speak much anymore, just observed. Sometimes she touched her children's heads softly, as if checking they were still real, still breathing. Reed noticed her flinch every time he stepped too close. And every time he helped her, she looked at him like she wasn't sure whether to thank him. More run. They were safe here, but not at peace. Not yet. Later. While Arla and Solon were sleeping beside the heater. Kyrene walked over. Her steps were quiet, but her voice was clear. "I need to tell you something," she said. Reed nodded and set the tool down. She looked at the floor, her hands trembling. "They weren't supposed to exist," she said. "My children." Reed didn't speak, just waited. "My mate. He wasn't just human," she continued. "He was one of the soldiers sent to observe our planet during the early truce missions. He wasn't allowed to be with someone like me, but he did. Anyway." Her eyes were wet now, but she didn't cry. "Our people called me a traitor, said I had defiled our blood, and when the collectors found out I was carrying hybrids," she paused, her voice breaking, "they offered money for me and my unborn children." Reed's hands clenched slowly. He had seen what the collectors did to mixed bloodlines, experiments, forced breeding, resale, violence. It wasn't survival, it was cruelty masked as trade. Kyrene looked up, her eyes glowing dim in the low light. "My mate was killed defending us," she said. "He begged me to find someone human to protect the children." Her voice turned into a whisper. "I didn't think I would find anyone." Reed stood and walked past her, heading toward the sealed entrance tunnel. He checked the sensor panel, still green. No movement, but he didn't relax. He couldn't. Not after what she just told him. When he came back, Kyrene was holding something. In her hand, it looked like a tiny necklace, silver, with a small chip embedded in the center. "This has everything," she said. "Proof of what they did. Names, locations, buyers. My mate stole it before he died." Reed took it gently, turning it in his hand. "This could bring down the entire network," he said. Kyrene nodded. "If we survive long enough to share it." That night, Reed sat near the children again, watching them breathe. Their faces looked peaceful, like they belonged in a world that wasn't trying to break them. Arla mumbled in her sleep. Reaching out, Reed caught her hand and held it lightly. She didn't wake, but her fingers wrapped around his. Something shifted inside him. This wasn't just about running anymore. This was about stopping them, so no other family would go through what Kyrene did, or what his own family had suffered. "Years ago," he whispered to himself, "they'll have to come through me." Far above, buried under snow, one of the sensors blinked red. Something had entered the outer tunnel. Slow, careful, steps cold, calculating. The collectors had arrived. The alarm was silent but deadly, just a soft red blink on the wall. Reed saw it and didn't hesitate. He stood up, crossed the room, and grabbed his rifle from the crate. Kyrene noticed his face change. "What is it?" she asked, already reaching for her children. "They've found us," he said calmly. "Stay here." Kyrene opened her mouth to protest, but stopped. There was something final in his voice. Not fear, not panic, just steel. Reed moved quickly, sliding the door shut behind him and locking it. The hallway felt colder now. The station groaned, as if it too felt the coming storm. He passed through the control room, checking the old cameras. 3 figures were moving through the upper tunnels. Slow, confident, collectors, armored in black, faces hidden behind glowing helmets. Their rifles were out. They weren't here to talk. Reed activated the traps he had rigged. Electric floor plates, falling crates, signal jammers, whatever he could cobble together. He didn't expect to stop them completely, just slow them, just buy time. The first explosion shook the corridor, sparks flew, metal shrieked, and one collector dropped hard. The second one fired blindly through the smoke. Reed waited in the shadows, then moved. His rifle barked. Once one clean shot to the neck. The second one fell. The third was smarter. She didn't chase the sound. Instead, she activated a thermal scan and turned slowly toward Reed's heat signature. Reed ducked behind a rusted beam, barely avoiding the shot. The plasma bolt tore through the wall behind him. Hot wind scorched his cheek. He gritted his teeth, crawled behind a stack of crates. The collector was approaching now, slow and sure. Her voice echoed through her helmet. "Return the assets, human, and you may live." Reed laughed once dry and bitter. "Not this time," he said. He stood and fired. She moved fast, dodging, rolling, firing back. Metal rang out. Crates exploded. Smoke filled the hall. Then silence. Reed's rifle clicked empty. The collector stepped out of the smoke. Gun raised. "You've lost," she said coldly. Behind her, Kyrene appeared. Her eyes burned with fury. Her claws extended. She jumped on the collector with a scream that echoed through the tunnels. They fell hard, fighting on the floor. Kyrene clawed and bit and slammed her head against the enemy's helmet. Reed grabbed a broken pipe and charged in. With one swing, he crushed the helmet's visor. The collector jerked, electricity sparking from her armor, then went still. Kyrene collapsed beside her, breathing hard. Blood dripped from her shoulder. "You weren't supposed to come out," Reed said, kneeling next to her. "I told you," she whispered, smiling weakly. "I protect them too." He wrapped her wound quickly, hands shaking. "We need to move," he said. "There might be more." They returned to the main room. Arla and Solon were awake, their eyes wide with fear. Kyrene knelt and hugged them close. Reed walked to the panel and triggered the emergency protocol. The system hummed and opened the hidden escape hatch beneath the floor. "There's a tunnel," he said. "It leads out to the ridge." Kyrene helped the children down first, then followed. Reed stayed behind just long enough to place one last charge by the main door, when he dropped into the tunnel and closed the hatch. The explosion above shook the earth. They crawled through the tight passage, hands scraping stone. Cold air blew from the other end. Freedom. When they emerged, the stars above looked brighter than before. The collectors were gone, at least for now. But Reed knew it wasn't over. Kyrene leaned against him, her body tired and bleeding. But her eyes were still sharp, still alive. Arla reached out and touched Reed's hand. "You came back," she whispered. Reed nodded. "I always will." He looked over the frozen land ahead, wide, dark, dangerous, but somewhere in that darkness, there was still hope, and he had a new reason to fight for it. The wind was softer now. The sky above shimmered with pale blue light as the storm passed and stars blinked into view. Reed stood at the edge of the ridge, his coat flapping behind him. Below them stretched miles of frozen land, cold, silent, and unforgiving. But they were still alive, and together. Kyrene sat near the children, her arm wrapped in cloth, her body tired, but her eyes calm. Arla slept with her head in her lap, while Solon kept watch like a little guardian. They had escaped death again, but they were not the same as before. Reed returned to the group, carrying pieces of an old transmitter pack. He placed them on the ground and knelt to work. Kyrene watched him, her voice quiet. "You could leave us now," she said. "You've done more than we ever asked." Reed didn't look up. He adjusted a wire, checked the signal light, then replied, "I didn't come this far to walk away." She smiled faintly. "You've changed," she said. "I didn't," he whispered. "I just remembered who I used to be." The transmitter blinked green, a working beacon, not for enemies, but for allies. He encoded the data chip Kyrene had given him and set the broadcast to loop. Names, faces, coordinates, proof of the collector network. He didn't know if help would come, but the truth would spread, and sometimes truth was a weapon more powerful than fire. Hours passed. They moved into a cave hidden under thick ice, using fallen rocks as a cover. Inside, Reed lit a fire, and the warmth returned once more. Kyrene leaned back against the cave wall, her head resting beside his shoulder. The children curled up near them, one on each side, their small bodies now relaxed, safe. For the first time in a long time, Kyrene looked up at him, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "They need someone, Reed," she said. "Not just to protect them, but to raise them, teach them, love them. I'm not asking because I'm weak," she added. "I'm asking because they deserve a father." Then, after a moment, she said, the words that stopped his breath, "Will you be that for them?" Reed looked down at Arla, her tiny hand resting on his chest. Solon was already leaning against his side, eyes closed, trusting. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence speak first, the crackle of fire, the deep rhythm of breathing, the gentle weight of a child's trust. Then he placed his hand over Kyrene's and gave her a single nod. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm already theirs." The fire flickered higher, casting soft light across the cave walls. Snow fell outside, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else. In the days that followed, they rebuilt, not cities or ships, but something smaller, something stronger, a family, a new kind of warmth, not the kind that burns, but the kind that burns inside and never fades. And so, the widow who had once knocked at his door, begging only for warmth, found far more than heat. She found a man who had lost everything and gave him reason to live again. And the children, who had been hunted like things, now had a name to whisper when they felt afraid. Papa.